In the sweltering heat of the summer of 1994, audiences were introduced to a cinematic thrill ride, powered by a single, ludicrously simple, but insanely effective premise. A city bus that, if it ever dropped below 50 miles per hour, would explode. That's it. No magic stones, no convoluted backstories, just a bomb, a bus, and a deadline that couldn't be ignored. The idea sounded borderline absurd on paper, but on screen it exploded into something electrifying. That ticking clock setup, half ridiculous, half genius, became the relentless engine behind Speed, and it didn't just fit neatly into the already crowded landscape of 90s action films. It detonated in the middle of it, sending shockwaves through a genre that was already firing on all cylinders. While the decade was saturated with testosterone-fueled blockbusters, from the likes of Die Hard with a Vengeance to True Lies, Speed didn't just join the race, it floored the gas and blew past the competition. At the time, Speed was casually referred to by industry insiders and journalists as Die Hard on a Bus, a phrase that simultaneously captured its appeal and grossly underestimated its uniqueness. That comparison wasn't completely off base, though. After all, Jan de Bont, the man stepping behind the camera for the first time as a director, had been the cinematographer for Die Hard as well as The Hunt for Red October. He was no stranger to orchestrating tension, and he brought that same sense of precision to Speed. Where other films might have buckled under the pressure of such a high-concept pitch, de Bont's vision kept things grounded, kinetic, and almost unbearably taut. The man knew how to stretch a moment of suspense until it sang. The core idea, however, didn't come from de Bont. It came from an unexpected game of cinematic telephone. Screenwriter Graham Yost, the man responsible for putting pedal to metal in the script, got the initial spark from his father, Canadian television personality Elwy Yost. Elwy had seen the 1985 thriller Runaway Train, and in a moment of misremembering, told his son that the train had a bomb on it. That detail turned out to be false. There was no bomb, but the imaginary version of the story struck a nerve. Graham thought the idea had legs, but he wanted to raise the stakes, up the tension, and confine the danger to something even more claustrophobic and chaotic than a train. So, he swapped the train for a public bus and created a horrifyingly simple scenario. If the bus dropped below 50 miles per hour, it would explode. Initially, he called the script Minimum Speed, a name that was both literal and slightly lifeless. Thankfully, that title didn't stick. The screenplay made the rounds in Hollywood, gaining interest but also skepticism. Paramount Pictures initially showed some curiosity, but eventually passed, unsure whether audiences would want to spend almost 2 hours inside a moving vehicle. Eventually, the project found a home at 20th Century Fox, and from there, it gained traction fast. Yost's original draft had a much narrower scope. The entire movie was meant to take place on the bus, from the moment the bomb was discovered until the final explosion or escape. But Jan de Bont, who had a sharp eye for cinematic pacing, pushed for more variety. He wanted to start the film with a bang, literally, by opening on a nerve-wracking elevator rescue. This gave the audience an instant jolt of adrenaline and introduced the bomb squad's resourcefulness from the get-go. At the other end of the movie, he wanted a big, dramatic finale that would shift gears entirely. Instead of letting the tension deflate after the bus storyline wrapped up, de Bont pushed for a final act set on a subway, allowing the characters and the audience to careen toward one last explosive confrontation. To polish things further, Joss Whedon was brought in just before production started. Known for his sharp dialogue and knack for humanizing larger-than-life situations, Whedon retooled much of the character work and delivered the sort of zippy, grounded lines that made the film quotable. He refined Jack Traven, played by Keanu Reeves, into someone who wasn't a swaggering tough guy, but rather a composed, capable officer with a dry sense of humor and genuine concern for the people around him. Whedon also trimmed the script's more forced moments and added what would become one of the most iconic lines in 90s cinema. Pop quiz, Hotshot. Keanu Reeves wasn't the obvious choice to lead a high-stakes, high-octane action thriller. In the early 1990s, he was mostly associated with playing laid-back slackers and earnest romantics, thanks to roles like Ted in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and the surf-loving FBI agent, Johnny Utah in Point Break. While Point Break nudged him toward action territory, there was still a sense that Reeves was more comfortable with introspective characters than with playing a traditional tough guy. He didn't carry the same grizzled weight as, say, Bruce Willis or Mel Gibson, but that turned out to be an advantage. Director Jan de Bont saw in Reeves something other filmmakers had missed: a grounded physical presence and a kind of quiet intensity that made him not only believable in extreme situations, but also human. Reeves brought an earnestness to the role of Jack Traven, a cool under-pressure LAPD officer that helped sell the film's wildest moments. He wasn't smirking through it all. He was figuring it out, sweating it out, and barely hanging on, just like we were. Sandra Bullock, at the time, was still on the rise. She'd had roles in films like Demolition Man, but hadn't yet become the household name she would be after Speed hit. She wasn't the first pick for the role of Annie Porter, the quick-witted, unlucky commuter who ends up driving a city bus rigged with a bomb. In fact, the character was originally conceived as an African-American paramedic, and actresses like Halle Berry were considered. The role was even floated to Ellen DeGeneres when the filmmakers thought about taking it in a more comedic direction. But once the character was reshaped as a love interest and emotional anchor for Reeves's Jack, Bullock emerged as the perfect fit. She had a down-to-earth quality and a natural screen presence that made her instantly relatable. She wasn't playing a superhero or a caricature. She was playing someone who felt real, someone who could be your neighbor or your friend, suddenly thrown into an impossible situation. And her chemistry with Reeves was undeniable. The dynamic between them, her warmth and nervy humor balancing his cool determination, became one of the film's strongest assets. Without that connection, the movie might have still worked, but it wouldn't have soared the way it did. Then there was Dennis Hopper, playing the villainous Howard Payne. Hopper wasn't phoning it in. He was absolutely chewing the scenery in the best possible way. A former bomb squad technician turned unhinged extortionist, Payne wasn't just evil. He was methodical, furious, and convinced he'd been wronged. Hopper gave the character a manic, giddy energy that made him both terrifying and entertaining. He didn't growl or brood like other villains of the era. He laughed, teased, and needled his enemies, always one step ahead until finally, he wasn't. He delivered lines like, "Poor people are crazy, Jack. I'm eccentric," with just enough venom to be funny and unsettling at the same time. What could have been a one-note bad guy became a fully formed character, thanks to Hopper's performance, his madness laced with bitter logic and twisted pride. Supporting roles were just as carefully cast. Jeff Daniels, playing Jack's partner Harry, brought warmth and wit to a character who could have easily been forgotten. Joe Morton, as the commanding officer Mac, added grit and urgency. Alan Ruck as the hapless tourist Doug and Beth Grant as the skittish Helen weren't just background noise. They helped populate the bus with believable human responses. The ensemble gave the audience a range of emotions to invest in, which made the stakes feel higher. These weren't faceless passengers. They were people you could root for. As for the action, Speed was committed to doing things the old-school way. There were no digital effects, no pixelated explosions, and no green screen chases. Instead, the movie relied on real stunts, real vehicles, and real locations. It had grit because it was physical. It felt immediate and raw because it was. The filmmakers used 11 different GM New Look buses for various parts of the shoot. Some were modified to steer from the roof. One was gutted for interior scenes. Others were rigged for jumps and crashes. One was sacrificed entirely for the final explosion. That unforgettable jump over the unfinished freeway, it wasn't CGI, it was a practical stunt. The bus was launched off a ramp and it actually flew through the air. Of course, in reality, a city bus wouldn't make the leap. Mythbusters later tested the scenario and called it out as impossible. But in the moment, with the music swelling and the stakes maxed out, it didn't matter. You bought it. You were in. That commitment to practical effects gave the movie a weight that's often missing in modern action films. Director Jan de Bont, with his background as a cinematographer, knew how to shoot action that felt both coherent and visceral. You always understood where you were. You always understood what was at risk. There was no chaos for chaos's sake. What also helped Speed stand out was its relentless pacing. The film is practically a masterclass in structure. It begins with a tense elevator rescue, an action sequence that would serve as a climax in most films, and then just keeps ratcheting up the tension. There's no fat on the bone. There's no scene that doesn't move the story forward or raise the stakes. The script doesn't waste time on unnecessary backstories or melodrama. It tells you what the situation is and drops you in. Even the much-debated shift to the subway system in the final act maintains the momentum. Some argue that the movie should have ended when the bus exploded, but that last segment gave the hero and villain one final face-off, and it capped off the ride with a derailment through Hollywood Boulevard. The geography may change, but the stakes never dip. That's what makes the film's pacing so effective. It knows how to push, pause, and escalate without ever letting the tension deflate. Speed raced into theaters on June 10, 1994, right in the thick of a blockbuster-heavy summer that was already brimming with heavyweight titles like The Flintstones, The Lion King, Forrest Gump, and True Lies. Despite the stiff competition, Speed hit the ground running, debuting at number 1 at the North American box office. Its momentum didn't falter. For several weeks, it held on to the top spot, only eventually getting knocked off by Mike Nichols' Wolf. Even then, it kept pulling in strong numbers, both domestically and overseas, going on to rack up over $350 million worldwide. That figure is all the more impressive considering the film's modest budget, estimated somewhere between $30 and $37 million. For a high-concept thriller that many studios initially doubted would work, especially one mostly confined to a city bus, its box office dominance was an undeniable victory. Critics embraced it with near-universal praise. Roger Ebert, whose opinion carried serious weight, awarded it a full 4-star review, calling the experience manic exhilaration. Both Siskel and Ebert gave it enthusiastic thumbs up on their show, praising not just the non-stop pacing, but also the performances and direction. Audiences echoed those sentiments, giving it an A grade through CinemaScore, an important metric at the time for gauging word-of-mouth momentum. Entertainment Weekly dubbed it a blast of pure action adrenaline, a phrase that neatly captured how the film felt for many first-time viewers. At the 67th Academy Awards, Speed walked away with 2 Oscars. One for Best Sound, and another for Best Sound Effects Editing. That recognition wasn't just a technicality. Those awards highlighted how crucial the film's sound design was to maintaining its white-knuckle tension. The film also triumphed at the British Academy Film Awards, picking up BAFTAs in the same 2 categories, cementing its status not just as a commercial hit, but also a respected technical achievement. Even decades after its release, Speed continues to be held up as a high watermark in the action genre. It's frequently cited in retrospectives and academic discussions as one of the tightest, most efficiently constructed action films of the 1990s, if not ever. Film schools use it as a textbook example of a lean, focused screenplay that knows exactly what story it's telling and wastes no time telling it. Directors and screenwriters often point to its pacing and structure as a model of how to keep an audience locked in for 2 solid hours without resorting to gimmicks or convoluted twists. Quentin Tarantino, never shy with his opinions, even included it in his list of top 20 movies he'd seen between 1992 and 2009. High praise from someone known for dissecting genre cinema with surgical precision. The film also left a deep imprint on the careers of its cast and crew. Keanu Reeves was instantly vaulted into the A-list and never really looked back. His mix of physicality, stoicism, and sincerity in Speed laid the groundwork for his later reinvention as a modern action icon in The Matrix and John Wick. Sandra Bullock, meanwhile, became an overnight sensation. Her performance as Annie Porter, sharp, funny, vulnerable, and ultimately heroic, made her not just a breakout star, but America's sweetheart. Dennis Hopper, already a cinematic legend by that point, delivered one of his most memorable performances as Howard Payne. His gleefully unhinged turn as the villain gave the film its edge, elevating Payne beyond a generic bad guy into something iconic and quotable. And then there was Jan de Bont, making his directorial debut after a long career as a cinematographer. He followed Speed with Twister in 1996, another adrenaline-charged crowd pleaser built on high-concept spectacle and practical effects. Of course, we all know what happened next. Speed 2, Cruise Control arrived in 1997, and let's just say it didn't live up to expectations. With Reeves wisely sitting out, the film swapped a speeding bus for a slow-moving cruise ship and traded suspense for confusion. Critics savaged it, audiences shrugged, and its legacy quickly sank beneath the waves. Sandra Bullock herself has poked fun at it over the years, calling it a mistake she wouldn't make again. For many fans of the original, Speed 2 has become something of a cautionary tale. Lightning rarely strikes twice, especially when you ditch what made the first film work in the first place. Still, the misfire of the sequel hasn't dimmed the brilliance of the original. If anything, it's only sharpened the appreciation for how finely tuned Speed really is. The reason the movie holds up so well is because it doesn't try to be more than it needs to be. It trusts the premise, leans into it, and lets the story play out without filler or fat. There's no bloated mythology, no unnecessary character arcs, no forced attempts at emotional gravitas. Just a simple hook, a bomb on a bus that'll explode if it goes under 50 miles per hour, and the constant pressure of what comes next. Every scene serves the story. Every action sequence has a point. Every character, even the passengers with just a few lines, feels like part of the world. That's why Speed still resonates. It respects its audience's intelligence. It moves fast, but it never cheats. It keeps you guessing without resorting to convoluted twists. It feels physical and real, even when it's pushing the bounds of physics. It's a masterclass in tension, pacing, and payoff. It's not just Die Hard on a bus, even if that's how some people still describe it. It's Speed. And almost 30 years later, it still holds up as one of the leanest, meanest, most satisfying action movies ever made. Pop quiz Hotshot. What's loud, fast, explosive, and unforgettable? You already know.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1 lines on X, we're here just for you.